When I was a kid, my mom used to tell me stories about our family, little tales about my grandparents, her childhood, and how we came from a long line of honorable, hard-working people. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mom. But as I grew older, I started noticing cracks. Whenever I asked about my dad's side of the family, she'd shut down the conversation. If I pressed, she'd get angry. "They're not worth talking about," she'd say, as if that ended the matter. Dad passed away when I was 12, and after that, the silence around his family became even thicker. Mom told me his relatives moved away and didn't care about us. It stung, but I had no reason to doubt her back then. Last month, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old box wedged behind a stack of holiday decorations. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a small, leather-bound journal. The handwriting on the first page made my heart skip. It was my dad's. The first few pages were simple notes about daily life, work schedules, shopping lists. But then I found an entry that stopped me cold. "If something happens to me, tell Anna the truth. She deserves to know about her real family, real family." I sat there staring at the words until they blurred. My mind raced with questions. What truth had Mom been hiding all these years? Why would Dad write something like that instead of just telling me himself? I decided to dig deeper. That night, after Mom went to bed, I went back to the attic box. The letters inside were all addressed to my dad, from someone named Grace. The tone was warm, even affectionate. They spoke of visiting soon and finally meeting Anna. One letter mentioned the land and how it should stay in the family. Another talked about how much I had grown since they'd last seen me. The dates lined up with my early childhood. But I had no memory of these people at all. The next day, I casually asked Mom if she remembered anyone named Grace. She froze for half a second before forcing a smile. "No one important," she said, brushing it off. But her voice had that sharp edge I recognized, the one she used when she was lying. That was when I knew. My mom wasn't just keeping secrets. She was actively rewriting our family history. And if Dad's journal was right, the truth wasn't just about people. It was about something bigger, something valuable. I made up my mind right then. I was going to find Grace. I didn't care how far I had to travel or how uncomfortable the conversation would be. I was done living in a version of my life that someone else had edited for me. The first step was figuring out who Grace was. I had her last name from one of the old letters, but it was smudged in places. It looked like Henderson, or maybe Henderson. Either way, it was enough to start. I went online and searched every combination I could think of. Grace Henderson, plus my dad's name. After hours of scrolling through search results and public records, I found a lead. A Grace Henderson living in a small coastal town 3 states away. She would have been about my dad's age. And judging by the voter registration record I found, she had lived in the same place for over 20 years. That stability gave me hope. Maybe she was still there, still alive, still willing to talk. I called her number 3 times over 2 days. No answer. On the 3rd try, someone finally picked up. The voice was older, shaky but warm. "Hello." I froze for a second, then blurted out, "Hi, my name's Anna. I think you knew my father." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice tinged with disbelief, she said, "You're David's daughter." It wasn't a question. She knew exactly who I was. My heart was pounding now. "Yes," I said. "I found some letters. I need to talk to you." Grace hesitated. "It's complicated," she murmured, "but I think it's time. Come by my house. Sooner rather than later." She gave me the address, and before I could overthink it, I told her I'd be there the next day. When I told Mom I was going on a short trip for work, she narrowed her eyes, but didn't press for details. I could tell she didn't fully believe me, but I didn't care. If she knew I was about to dig into the past, she'd find a way to stop me. The drive to Grace's town took nearly 6 hours. It was one of those picturesque places you'd expect to see in a travel magazine. Quiet streets, ocean breeze, and small, where everyone seemed to know each other. Grace's house was a modest white cottage with blue shutters. When she opened the door, I was struck by how much her eyes resembled my dad's. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind you give when you've been waiting for something bittersweet to happen. Over tea at her kitchen table, she told me she was my father's older sister. My aunt. She and Dad had been close their whole lives. But after he married my mom, something happened that tore the family apart. When I asked what, Grace's expression darkened. "Your mother made sure we stayed out of your life," she said quietly. "But it wasn't just about family drama. It was about what your father was supposed to inherit, and what she took instead." My chest tightened. "What did she take?" I asked. Grace leaned closer. "Land. Property worth more than you can imagine. It should have been yours." I stared at Grace, trying to process her words. "Property, I don't understand. We never had anything like that. We barely made ends meet when I was a kid." She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. "That's because your mother sold it," Grace said, her voice heavy. "Your dad inherited a large piece of coastal land from our parents. It was meant to be a family retreat, something to pass down. But after you were born, things changed." Grace explained that shortly after my first birthday, my father was in an accident that kept him bedridden for months. During that time, my mother took control of all the finances, claiming she was just helping. She convinced him to sign legal papers he didn't fully read, Grace said. By the time he realized what had happened, the land was already transferred. Not to her directly, but to a company she controlled. My stomach churned. "Why didn't Dad fight it?" I asked. Grace's gaze softened. "He tried. But your mother threatened to take you and disappear. She told him you'd grow up without him if he made trouble. And he loved you too much to risk that." Hearing that made my throat tighten. I thought of my dad, the quiet, gentle man who used to tuck me in and tell me bedtime stories. I couldn't imagine the pain he must have felt, knowing something so valuable was slipping away. Grace said she had tried to step in, but my mother cut off all communication. Letters went unanswered. Phone calls were ignored. Eventually, legal threats arrived in the mail, warning Grace to stay out of family affairs. "She didn't just erase us from your life," Grace said bitterly. "She rewrote the story, so you'd never think to look for us." I sat in stunned silence, my tea gone cold in front of me. "Why tell me now?" I finally asked. Grace leaned back, eyes glistening. "Because I made a promise to your father. He knew he didn't have long after the illness started. He told me, when she's old enough to understand, tell her the truth." It hit me then. Dad must have been sick for a while before he died, and he probably knew my mother wouldn't let him explain everything to me. That's why he left the journal. Grace reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of old deeds, legal documents, and photographs of the property. My heart pounded as I looked at them. A sweeping stretch of untouched coastline, worth millions in today's market. "This was your birthright," Grace said softly. "You can still fight for it, but you need to be ready. Your mother will not give up without a war." Her words sent a shiver through me. I didn't know if I was ready for a war, but I knew I couldn't walk away. The drive back home felt longer than the trip to Grace's. Every mile closer to my mother's house felt heavier, like the air itself knew what I was about to do. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were trembling. I didn't even take my bag inside. I went straight to the kitchen, where she was chopping vegetables like it was any ordinary evening. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was steady, but my chest was pounding. She glanced up, eyebrows raised. "About what?" The casual tone was deliberate. I could see it in her eyes. She was preparing to control the conversation before it even began. I set the folder from Grace on the table. "This, I know about Dad's land. I know you sold it. I know you cut his family out of our lives." Her knife froze midair for just a second, before she placed it down slowly. "You've been talking to Grace?" she said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Her voice had an edge now, sharp and cold. She always did like to meddle. I forced myself to keep eye contact. "She didn't meddle. She told me the truth. You stole from Dad. From me." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I didn't let them falter. My mother leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You think you know the truth? You're still a child, Anna. Your father wasn't the man you think he was. That land would have ruined us." "That's a lie," I said quickly, but her calm expression made me hesitate for just a moment. That was her power. She could plant doubt like a seed, then step back and watch it grow. She walked over, standing close enough for me to smell her perfume. "Your father made mistakes. He trusted people he shouldn't have. I fixed that. I protected you." Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed cold. "By cutting me off from my family?" I shot back. By taking something that was supposed to be mine? I could feel my pulse in my temples. Her smile was small and chilling. If it were yours, you'd have it. Life doesn't give prizes to people who can't fight for them. She reached past me to grab the chopping board as if the conversation was over. But it wasn't over. Not for me. I've proof, I said, and I'm going to fight for it. She didn't flinch. Then be ready for the truth about your father to come out too, she said, her voice dripping with warning. Because I promise you, Anna, I'm not the only one who kept secrets. Her words followed me long after I left the kitchen, twisting inside my mind. What else could she possibly mean? More importantly, was she bluffing? Or did she really have something that could shatter the image I had of my dad? I barely slept that night. My mother's words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. I'm not the only one who kept secrets. It was the kind of statement designed to stick. Sharp, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If she was bluffing, I needed to prove it. And if she wasn't, then I had to know what I was really dealing with before I took her on. Either way, I couldn't go into a fight blind. I started with Dad's old things, the boxes I had stored away in the attic. They smelled faintly of cedar and dust, like time had preserved them just for this moment. There were photo albums, stacks of letters, and a few journals, but nothing that screamed hidden scandal. Halfway through the second box, I found an old metal lockbox. The key was taped to the bottom as if Dad had wanted it to be found eventually. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting I didn't even know what. Inside were papers, hospital bills, insurance forms, and letters from a law firm I'd never heard of. The oldest letter was from before I was born. Words were vague, but it mentioned pending litigation and possible settlement. I called Grace. Did Dad ever have legal trouble? I asked. She hesitated before answering. Not trouble exactly. But there was a business deal gone wrong before he met your mother. Invested in a friend's company, and it collapsed. Spent years paying off debts he didn't owe. It didn't sound like the kind of thing that would destroy his reputation, but I knew my mother could twist it if she wanted to. Still, it wasn't enough to scare me away from the truth. Next, I dug into the public records. Most of it was dry legal jargon, but I pieced together a timeline. Dad had cleared the debts years before I was born. There was no criminal record, no bankruptcies, nothing that would justify what my mother had done. But then I found something strange. A property record showing that. For a brief period, the coastal land had been jointly owned by my dad and someone else. The name was blacked out in the copy I found online, but it wasn't my mother's. It felt like hitting a locked door. Who was this person? Why had my mother worked so hard to erase them from the picture that night? I stared at the documents spread out across my table, the evidence forming a jagged, incomplete puzzle. Every piece pointed toward a bigger story, one my mother had no intention of letting me hear. I knew I had two options: confront her again and risk her twisting the narrative, or keep digging quietly until I had every piece of the puzzle. My gut told me the second choice was safer, for now. The war hadn't started yet, but the battle lines were being drawn, and this time, I was ready to fight smart. I spent 2 days piecing the puzzle together. Coastal property had once been coned with someone named Eleanor Price. Through a friend at the county records office, I finally learned the truth. Eleanor was my father's first wife. Grace explained they'd married young, shared the property, and planned to build a retreat before life pulled them apart. Their divorce was friendly, but Dad kept part of the land untouched to honor her memory after she passed away. My mother hated that. To her, Eleanor wasn't history. She was competition. Erasing her name was a way to protect her marriage, even from the past. When I confronted Mom, she was cold. She's dead, Emily. Your father chose me. I told her I was restoring Eleanor's name. She didn't fight, maybe knowing she'd already lost. Weeks later, I stood on that untouched corner with Grace. I placed a small plaque for Eleanor, loved, remembered, and never erased. This wasn't about choosing sides. It was about telling the truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. Family history isn't just the parts you like, it's the whole messy truth. I wouldn't let it be buried again.